Second Battle of Târgu Frumos. The Second Battle of Târgu Frumos, part of the First Jassy-Chisinau offensive, was a military engagement primarily between the Wehrmacht and Red Army forces in May 1944, near Iai, Romania. Military historian David Glantz claims the battle resulted from a Stavka order to the forces of the 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts to commence a coordinated invasion of Romania. It was directed towards Iai with a secondary objective of establishing bridgeheads across the Prut River. The battle was only briefly described by Soviet historians. Recently, Russian historians have begun describing this as a distinct battle. For example, the 4-volume Great Patriotic War prepared for the Russian Federation states. Thus, during the Târgu Frumos operation, the 2nd Ukrainian Front's forces tried unsuccessfully to complete a deep penetration of the enemy's defense and reach the territory between the Prut and Sarat rivers. By order of the Stavka, they themselves went over to the defensive along existing lines on May 6. The several attempts by the 3rd Ukrainian Front's armies to conduct attacks from their Dniester bridgeheads and seize new bridgeheads also led to nothing. According to accounts by Otto von Manchufel, one of the 2 German division commanders, and Ferdinand Maria von Senger-und the German forces defeated a Soviet offensive by the 2nd Ukrainian Front that was expected to be a precursor of a much larger offensive in northern Ukraine. The Battle of Târgu Frumos has been used as a case study in officer tactical education in the United States Army and other armies, teaching how a mobile defense can defeat an armored spearhead. There are however questions about the accounts by the 2 German officers, relating to the failure to include Romanian forces into their account. During April 1944 a series of offensives by the Red Army, including in the Iași sector, was intended to deceive OKH as to the real time and place of the major offensive planned in Belorussia. The German-Romanian forces successfully defended against the local limited objective attacks throughout the month of April. The attack aiming at Târgu Frumos was the initial attempt by the Red Army to achieve its goal of deceiving the OKH, and testing the Axis defences in Romania while preventing movement of reserves to the Belarusian sector of the Eastern Front. It had been thought that May Day, the traditional Workers' Day of celebration, would see the opening of a new assault by the Soviet forces. But the offensive reopened on May 2, heralding 3 shattering and unceasing days and nights of combat. Behind a 60-minute drum fire at dawn, 2 Soviet armies moved into an attack. The Battle of Târgu Frumos was a series of engagements and smaller combats over several days during which armoured forces of the Wehrmacht LVII Panzer Corps, in particular of the Grossdeutschland Division and 24th Panzer Division, engaged the Red Army's 16th Tank Corps of the 2nd Tank Army, which was also attacking from the north. One unit's experience in the opening hours of the battle was described as such. PZGR-RGTGD and its Romanian allies occupied a well-wired-in and mine-strewn line running to the right of 3 SSPZ.div. Totenkopf's positions. The Soviets advanced in great waves, their tanks and infantry mixed together. Moving much faster than the Germans had anticipated, they overwhelmed, wiping it out to the last man. While temporary battalion commander attempted to halt and repulse the Soviets with what was left of his battalion, the Romanians to the left of cowered in their trenches like herrings, as company commander later recounted. Indeed, the Romanians seemed to have reached an unofficial ceasefire with the enemy. That night the Luftwaffe succeeded in mounting an airstrike in the enemy rear area, to no avail. The next morning the Soviets resumed their attack, preceding it with a bombardment of phosphorus shells. Over 100 enemy tanks and assault guns advanced against. With his Romanian artillery remaining inactive, could count only on the support of 3, and the 4 15 cm Nebelwerfer multiple rocket launchers of. Was soon back to the Nebelwerfer's position where it formed a hedgehog defense, and a handful of men then managed to gain the temporary safety of the railway embankment in their rear. His battalion scattered, sent with 4 SPWs to cover the wide-open left flank, completely vulnerable when the Romanians abandoned their positions. Although the enemy had not made any deep penetrations, the tension of the past 2 days had exhausted the Panzer Grenadiers. Suddenly, 4 T-34s were in among the SPWs when, as if by magic, tanks and assault guns of the SS Division Totenkopf appeared. Before a single T-34 could train its gun, all had received direct hits. Immediately thereafter Oberst Hans Ulrich Rudel's Ju-87 Stukas led off a counter-thrust by Totenkopf's Panzer Regiment, accompanied by 4 SBWs. The Panzer Grenadiers took a measure of revenge for what they had endured over the past 48 hours, before being pulled out of the line to regroup and refit. Despite initial successes of the Soviet attack, a series of counterattacks managed to halt the Soviet offensive. The battle reduced Soviet tank strength to a point where a continued attack into Romania was not possible. In the 3 days of fighting, the Wehrmacht LVII Panzer Corps and Lei Army Corps defeated the Soviet force and claimed the destruction of over 350 Soviet tanks, ca 100 of these claimed by 24th Panzer Division. During the battle, Otto von Manchufel, commander of the Grossdeutschland Division, first encountered the new Soviet Stalin tank. It was at Târgu Frumos that I first met the Stalin tanks. It was a shock to find that, although my Tigers began to hit them at a range of 3,000 meters, our shells bounced off, and did not penetrate them until we had closed to half that distance. But I was able to counter the Russians' superiority by maneuver and mobility, in making the best use of ground cover. Manchufel also noted that the Stalin tanks had several disadvantages: slow, not maneuverable enough, as well, in my opinion their crews were not sufficiently familiar with the tank. Soviet sources make few references to the battle. Historian David Glantz has found some mention of operations in Romania in April and May 1944 in divisional histories. The main source for him is the Soviet 2D Tank Army's history, where a direct reference to the battle is found. It states that in late March 1944, the tank army was shifted into the sector of 27th Army with the mission of attacking in the direction of Focuri and Păgăliloi. Subsequently, the army was to strike a blow toward the city of Iași and secure it. In the narrative on follow-on operations by the tank army it is stated that it attacked together with 27th Army's 35th Rifle Corps. It also claims that the 3rd Tank Corps reached Târgu Frumos, but was repulsed by the German counterattacks. The 16th Tank Corps identified by the German officers appears not to be mentioned in the account. Despite German claims that the Soviet attack was a full-fledged offensive, it appears now that the Battle of Târgu Frumos was a relatively small-scale operation in the context of 1944's fighting on the Eastern Front, even though a Soviet success would have put the Red Army into a much stronger position for its eventual attack into Romania. At the end of the Battle of Târgu Frumos the front line stabilized. However, it was from these positions that the Soviets launched the successful Jassy Chisinau offensive in late August 1944. On a political level, the battle accelerated the activities of anti-German forces in Romania, leading to negotiations between the traditional political parties and the Romanian Communist Party, represented by Lucreu Trăcanu,